Jack Osint. I work with the Coalition to Protect New York, the Committee to Preserve the Finger Lakes, and Starkey Citizens for a Healthy and Clean Environment, among others. And I'm here tonight to introduce a program which, in my experience, is unique in that it is bringing the actual workers from the gas field to this forum to explain what it's like to be on the gas fields, to experience what's happening in those gas fields, and to also talk about the health effects that come from that kind of exposure. We also have the privilege of having a medical doctor here who has done an extensive amount of work in addressing the health impacts of this industry. I'd like to note that during the formation of this forum, I called across Pennsylvania attempting to get a Pennsylvania physician to come and speak, hoping that we'd have a physician that could testify to some of the impact of Act 13, which many of you are probably familiar with. But of all those doctors I contacted, they refused and said that they would not be able to have they didn't feel that I was going to be able to get any physician from Pennsylvania to come because of the uncertainty under Act 13. Which brings me to the last presenter tonight, an attorney who's going to talk directly to Act 13, what its impact has been on the medical profession in Pennsylvania. And to answer any questions, we'll have a Q&A session after the forum ends. Just to note, in the previous two forums that we've held, one in Bath and one in Spencer this afternoon, we drew 75 people last night in Bath and around 50 in Spencer on a beautiful sunny afternoon, and I'm impressed with the number of people here tonight as well. Thank you very much for showing that kind of support on a beautiful evening. So to get started, I'd like to introduce Mac Sawyer. Mac has worked in the gas fields as the go-to guy. He describes himself as having worked with a LLC, a limited liability corporation, that is part of the vertically integrated structure of these companies in Pennsylvania, where they protect their liability by having just so much money within each of those limited liability corporations, all the way up to the big boys at the top with deep pockets. So if you're dealing with any segment of that vertically integrated industry, you're only dealing with a small piece of it. So it limits your legal ability to haul them into court and get the settlements that you should be getting. Mac has worked in the environmental sector. He was the environmental go-to guy in the company that he worked with, was close to the management of the company, and I'd like to have you give a rousing round of applause for Mac Sawyer.
Hey everybody, thank you. I've been driving truck for about 35 years. I did construction. I got hired on in the gas fields as a truck driver, but I learned the first day there, the guy told me that had been there for quite a while, never turn nothing down, always say yes and do what they want and you'll go far. I listened to him, and that's just what happened. I gained favor with a lot of the company men. I, just would always do what they wanted me to do. Guys would come up for 3-4 days, I'd stay a month, wouldn't go home. When I would go home, I'd be home 48 hours, they were blowing my phone up to go back again. I just want to tell you this, I was the biggest pro-gas guy you'd ever want to meet, man. I mean, I'm telling, looking at all of you right now, I loved the job, I loved the industry, I was fascinated with it, with all the extracts. Yeah, I'm 56 years old, and I wanted to go back to college to be a petroleum engineer. That's how much I love this. I didn't know it was as bad as it is. I really didn't. I had a friend of mine, Randy Moyer. Randy's like my best friend. Like, I worked with him there, got to know him personally, his son. I didn't see Randy for a while. When I did see him, Randy wasn't Randy. He had big patches, big blotches on him, just gaunt looking, sick. Just wasn't Randy. I was like, dude, what happened to you? He says, they poisoned me, Mac. I was like, come on, man, they didn't poison you. Didn't get it from there. You know, it's just the mentality that I had. I mean, I just refused. Just like a lot of pro-gas guys, you're going to hear the same thing. This didn't cause it. You guys are nuts. It's just nothing to do with it. They tried to blame him eating a bad sandwich. They said it was food poisoning. Everything. I'll tell you the truth. I didn't even believe it when I saw him. I just denied it. I met a microbiologist, Yuri Gorby. Randy found him on the internet. And when I met Yuri, I just told him straight up, I'm like, look, I don't believe in this crap. I think this is a bunch of nonsense. You know, gas is safe. You know, it's going to get us off this oil. It's really going to help the economy. You know, we're going to make a ton of money. Everybody's going to have good paying jobs, not no 7-Eleven stuff, really good money. And I fought Yuri. Everything he said, I tried to have a counterpoint, you know, because, you know, I just didn't believe it. And then he says to me, he goes, why don't you take a ride with me and come into the fields and meet some of these people? All right, and I did. And when I seen the people, and I seen they were sick, and I seen that they had the same stuff I did. Same rashes, you know, blackouts, you know, nosebleeds, just horrible joint pain, shortness of breath. I remember walking through the kitchen one time and not remembering something and waking up and my kids are standing over me freaking out. They said, Pop, you just passed out. What happened? Are you all right? I said, yeah, I'm all right. You know, I didn't know, you know. Well, I went into there with Yuri and he started showing me this stuff and started showing me, and I still didn't believe it. Until I started meeting the people. And that's when I really started to see what this was. They paint a pretty picture, they really do. And believe me, they want to be your best, you know, community friend. They really want to make friendships with the community. And they're going to throw a ton of money at you people. A ton of money, more money than you guys are. Going to build new roads, they're going to fix the town, they're going to do this, they're going to do that. And they will. But you're not going to have a town to call home. It's going to be wrecked and it's going to be ruined. The stuff that you're going to see traffic increase 24/7, 365. The only time they shut those wells down and those rigs down is from December 23rd to January 2nd. The only time they do that is through Christmas into the new year. They send everybody home, paid for, Texas, Louisiana, Colorado, wherever. You know, it's the only time they shut down. Rents, I don't know what you pay for rents around here, but when the gas company came to town, people that would charge $400, I wouldn't board a horse in these places. They're charging $3 grand, $2,800 a month for them. You can't get a house around here. You can't get an apartment because all these gas workers are here. The picture they're painting isn't what the reality is. This stuff is all radioactive. You don't hear that. This stuff is so deadly and just so radioactive, you're just not being told the truth. None of us were being told the truth. A lot of guys I worked with, a lot of guys they're really good guys. They're gone from their families. They're up here trying to make a living. I don't begrudge any man trying to feed his family. It's really an enticing thing that they say that they do. I mean, you know, you'd be a knucklehead, you know. I mean, not to better yourself and your kids and your children. But it's just not what they say. They're hauling a lot of these cuttings off the pad. Really bad stuff. Really bad stuff. They're taking it down now. They just started taking it where into horse heads. It's here. It's here. You guys got to stop it here. If it gets any further, if it starts coming in any further, if you guys only knew just how dangerous this stuff was, and they don't tell you a darn thing, you gotta, it's like you tooth and nail to try to get them to even own up to anything as far as what the compounds are, what's in the stuff. They won't tell you. The doctors, they got the doctors scared to death in Pennsylvania. They're scared to death. They won't even talk about it. They want to know nothing about it. You know, these range, a lot of these big companies, they're building all these multi-million-dollar new cancer wings in all these hospitals. You go into them, you see big plaques donated, built by Range, but you know, I mean, they're giving you cancer, at least they might as well give you some place to get treated for it. You know, as sick as that is, but that's just the reality of what it is. They're going to throw a lot of money at you, man. They really are, you know, and that's how they do it. Like, the people in Pennsylvania, we were the guinea pig, you know, the canary in the coal mine, if you will. We had no idea what this stuff was, man. They have destroyed my state. They have just destroyed it. I don't know, what do they got? 6,600 wells out there right now. In a very short period of time, they want to put 150,000 wells in. They want to put between 80 and 100,000 just up in here alone. You got to be kidding me. I mean, if this stuff wasn't, you couldn't even write a movie like this with the stuff that these guys want to do. And then what knucklehead wants to put a nat gas storage facility under the lakes? I mean, seriously, guys, seriously. I think, what, 3 weeks ago till the day, today or yesterday or maybe be tomorrow, that out in Wyoming, where there's nobody, they had a storage facility blow up out there. If that happened around here, you wouldn't be evacuating a block, you'd be evacuating the whole town. You really would. I mean, this stuff is no joke. They take this stuff into the landfills. It's already been proven. What I'm saying is the truth. Anybody want to doubt me, bring it on, because I'm telling you, they turn the radiation detectors off. Yeah, okay, yeah. Landfills, the way they're structured, they're layered, sand, debris, garbage layered, but it all has a structural thing, and it all goes into containment tanks. It's called leach. Pick the leach up, guess where we take it? Water treatment facility. Yeah. Like, the stuff that's in this mud, the stuff that we haul, they have brine on the sides, fresh water brine. They don't tell you this stuff's radioactive. I didn't know it. I have really severe health issues. My friend Randy, he couldn't even be here today because he's so sick. This guy has suffered for 18 months. Nobody's given him a thin dime. All they're trying to do, I don't know what they're trying to do. It's just unconscionable. What these people are doing, these guys should be in jail for. And I'm telling you now, if you guys knew the real threat that this is going to bring, that this is going to do, you just wouldn't put up with it, because I sure as heck wouldn't. I wouldn't. You know, and it's not someone, like, you know, just get it out now. Nobody forced me to go to work for these people. Nobody did. I was, you know, it was the money, you know, I just loved the job until I saw what it was, till I was asked to cover spills. I was asked to turn away, to look the other way. I filed reports. Guy came right up to me, put his arm around me and says, "We'll take care of this, somebody. We'll take care of this." You know what I'm saying, Mac? All right. Then it happened again. Well, we'll take care of it again. Just, you know, like, the stuff is bad stuff. I know what it did to our place down there. I've seen the animals that are sick. It's just no good, man. It's just no good. You know, people are sick. Birds falling out of the air. No bees, just finding bees dead. I mean, it's just the air is so bad. Then they got the compressors, the cryo plants, the separators. It's like, man, you know. What's really scary is the infrastructure that these people have in place. You know it's getting bad when the infrastructure's going in, because that's when it's getting ready to come up and online. They're building a $200 million separator down from me, 6 miles from my house. They just started it here, I believe this month, and it's to be done by 2015. It'll be online. I figure I got about a year before I get the heck out of here. Joe, great guy. I met him January 5th of this year. He was just all destroyed. He lived in a really impacted area, and we got Joseph out of there. Joseph is the first transplant to walk away from the gas fields, left a $250,000 home with the clothes on his back, because it's the only way he would have survived, because he would have died if he would have been there. And this is what you can look forward to. Guys, this is no joke, man. I can't stress it enough.
Tell them about Randy.
Yeah, Randy is just destroyed. He is so sick. He has lesions. He has stuff. You can actually see where they poisoned him. The stuff will just go under his skin, and it looks like he's possessed. It looks like it's a demon in him. I mean, it actually does. I mean, these things will come out this far off his skin, and it's just like, and he told me flat out, he's like, I see why people kill themselves. They get this stuff. There are people who kill themselves over this down my way. One woman, beautiful young woman, 26 years old with 2 children, went out, put the kids, went out and hung herself in the tree in front. It messes your mind up, these chemicals. You don't even know what the heck is in the stuff. They won't tell you, okay? Holes being burnt through the sides of the trucks hauling this mud. We can't even dump it around here. We got to take it to Texas or Colorado. They don't even want it here, it's so bad. If you hear anything I've said to you, you better hear this. Don't let these guys in. Do not let, at your own peril, do not let these guys in. And I don't give a crap how much money they offer you. It's just not worth it. You know who I really feel sorry for? How about everybody's grandkids? How about all the kids? When you guys look at yourselves, if you let these guys come in, we didn't do enough, but we're not New York. We're not New York. You guys, you know, when you guys have people like, just so many people that I met up here, you know, that you guys have a fire in the belly, not like these people down there. Like, I get it was all experimental, we were the first, I get that. But after knowing what I know now and seeing what they've done to our place down there, and West Virginia, which they've destroyed, and Eastern Ohio, now they want to come here. Now they want to come here. There is no putting the genie back in the bottle. Once it's out, it's out. Thank you very much, guys. One more thing, I didn't really touch on it because of time constraints. Like I ran environmental division, I had like a lot of crews under me, and you'd go onto pads, and you had maybe 50, 60 frac tanks, you know, with all the flow back production, all the stuff that's coming from 9 miles under the ground, it's taken up through the tube and shot into the tank. A lot of times you'll have mud in the tanks, could be to your knee, could be to here. You know, you open the clamshell in the tank, and then you got to crawl inside it. And they want you with a shovel, couple guys, and a 4-inch hose that they'll put in there, and then you shovel the hard mud and you shovel all the debris into the, and then it's sucked up into the truck. Then they go in and they pressure wash these tanks. They want these tanks all nice and clean for the next job. No respirators, no nothing. Stuff is all airborne, blown with hot water. I see kids in there. I've seen 17-year-old kids because they're going to go to work. They're going to go work for the oil company. Big money, big dreams. You're going to be a millionaire, kid. In there with bare feet. In there having a good old time. Just, oh my God, are you kidding me? And now a lot of, like I worked with 50-some guys when I was working there. Over half of them have problems. Half of the guys that I worked with have issues now. You know, what they do to the air. I mean, air in Colorado, it's, you know, it has the same smog as LA. It's just, they're not regulating this industry enough. They poison me, they poison Randy, they poison Joe, but you know what? There's 1,000 other people like us. And I guarantee you, if you guys let these guys here, you look at Joe, you take a good look at Joe. Joe was a stonemason, hard-working, buck kind of guy, big guy. Within 3 years, take a look at Joe, because I'll tell you right now, this is what you guys are going to look like. Thank you.
With that Italian last name still. Came out of the western part of the state, and as you heard earlier from Mac, is an environmental refugee. Joe is representative of so many other people in Pennsylvania that we don't hear about. Many of them have signed non-disclosure agreements with the industry. They've been paid off essentially, and they've been told that in order to keep that money, they can't speak to the public. Which severely limits our understanding in this state of what's actually going on in Pennsylvania, as well as it inhibits the health professionals in New York State to get a realistic picture of what's going on in Pennsylvania. So think of it as the price of doing business. If you continue to drill enough wells and rapidly enough, even though the production curve is only 2 years, you keep doing that as quickly as you can, you've got the money to pay off the harmed, as well as proceed with the rest of the industry. So I'd like to introduce Joe. He's a man who, if you look at him, you can envision a stonemason building that house that he built out in the western part of the state. Let's welcome Joe.
Thank you all for coming. I wish I could be here under different circumstances, but I guess we're just dealt what we're dealt. I was a 57-year resident of a small town called Cannonsburg, Pennsylvania, in Washington County. This area has been severely impacted by the industry, impacted to the point where they nicknamed my area the Saudi Arabia of Southwest PA. I don't know if that was a joke or they were really serious about that. Since 2005, it went from farmland, small industry, coal mining, just like good old boys. Nobody had a whole bunch of money, but everybody seemed to get by and did well, you know, considering. Well, now my new neighbors are Range Resources, Consul Energy, Shell Oil, Atlas Energy, Mark West Refinery. Excuse me. When these people come, they come big time. I mean, it's not you're going to see 20 one day, you're going to see 100 the next day. No, they come by the thousands instantly with their trucks, their equipment. They have bought pretty much 90% of the small business. These are guys I went to school with. They had weld shops, they had, you know, auto repair shops, they had all kind of different small businesses that no longer exist. because there's well equipment parked in the parking lots. Most of them lost, well, they sold out. They tossed enormous amounts of money. It was phenomenal. $1 million to these people is nothing. $10 million is nothing. $100 million is nothing. They built a refinery less than 1 mile, less than an eighth of a mile west of me, which I'm unfortunately downwind from, and they spent, I think, $3.4 billion in a cryo separator plant. Well, anyway, the water is the first thing that went bad. They did a well site 391 feet directly behind my house, killed my water, contaminated it. That's when I started first feeling the effects of this fracking. Then the refinery kind of put the icing on the cake. When it got to that point, 3 years later, it locked me up, totally. I had to go to the hospital in an ambulance because I had a seizure, because it just totally incapacitated me. I'm seeing a lot of new cancer research and treatment centers donated by my new neighbors. Plaques on the walls, kind of like they knew that they were going to have a problem with it, so they adjusted, accordingly, because of the massive amount of money that they had to work with. The chemical mine, my home, which it soon became life-threatening to me, so I had to evacuate it. I know people, they evacuate their homes for all kinds of reasons: floods, hurricanes, tornadoes, but rarely did I ever hear that they were well, in Texas, it just happened here a few weeks ago. They had to evacuate a town because of an explosion in a fertilizer factory, which was deadly. Okay. I walked away from a house I built with my father 35 years ago, which I really enjoyed, with nothing but hope for remission from a health condition created by the industry. They say it's stage 4 cancer that I have, but I've talked to some people that think it just might be progressive lesions, just for 3 years spent in this toxic environment. I started doctoring. Well, I was feeling bad, then I got to feeling real bad. If you think I look bad now, you should see me about 2 years ago. I was about 158 pounds. I was very pale in color, had trouble walking. My legs were like rubber. I could barely move. And this is all from water and air contamination. First, when my water went bad, I started getting rashes on my armpits, anywhere there was moisture. My groin area, my butt, my feet especially. Seems like it wanted to go to the furthest point on my body. My fingers started getting purple and numb. This was the beginning. This was just with the water contamination. So luckily, I was in good health most of my life. I never had any major health issues. I worked hard, I ate good, I slept good, until about 3 years into this process with these drillers. 2 years after that, I went to Canonsburg Emergency Room. There, they looked at me, took my vitals, did some testing, but I was only in there about 2 hours. They came to me and they said, "We have no diagnosis for you. We're going to ask you, you have to leave." And that's how we left it. Okay, I walked out of Canonsburg Emergency Room, went to my family doctor to try to get some testing done beyond what the emergency room people did. So we started. We did a liver biopsy. We did blood work, intense blood work. We did a bone scan. We did a colonoscopy. Luckily, the cancer did not show up in these areas. Okay, they were going to do a lung biopsy, and I was looking at them like, well, how much are you going to poke on me before you tell me anything? You know, because of this Act 13 thing that they have in Pennsylvania. January 7th, I was at a friend's house. I backed off of the testing. I was at a friend's house and we were just hanging out. All of a sudden, something come over me, and that's when I had a seizure. They called it a grand mal seizure. Anyway, I don't remember anything but seeing the ambulance drivers looking over me. Don't remember the emergency room whatsoever. Next thing I know, I'm in a hospital room in Washington Hospital, which I spent 3 weeks being tested, probed, 10 treatments of radiation therapy to the polyps in my brain. I have 2 masses in my lungs, which, like I say, they say are masses, but they could be the lesions. Like I say, they're not telling you either way, because they'll have to divulge information that they really don't want to go there. So after 3 weeks in Washington Hospital and 10 treatments of radiation therapy, and now they want me to go into chemotherapy, they're not giving me any information. Like I said, they're not coming off with a diagnosis. They're saying, okay, you got stage 4 cancer, you could live 6 to 12 months, okay, but they're not being particular about it. They're just doing a massive overlook of it all, which I don't think is such a good idea. I had 6 doctors in Washington Hospital look at my feet, and not a single one of them could give me a diagnosis, nor did they want to do a biopsy, nor did they want to do anything. So my only option was to relocate, get out of the area, and thanks to Mac and his beautiful wife Lisa, they come up with the money, because I did not have it, to relocate me up here to Claysburg, PA. Since then, I've been up here 3 weeks, feeling a little bit different. I mean, I don't have the pain, I don't have the coughing, I don't have the impacts of the water in the air, you know, is lessening in my body, and slowly but surely, I hope that, you know, it gets better as time goes on. There's a doctor up here in Altoona that's willing to see me for further cancer treatment. I want to continue my treatment. I'm on 5 different medications to try to keep the seizures under control. What else do you do? It's a sad situation where for them to make the type of money that they want to make, that they would do this to people's health. And I don't want a single one of you to get what I got from this industry, because it would truly break my heart. I thank you all for listening. Thank you for your time.
And like I said before, these 2 men are only representative of many, many others that are in Pennsylvania that can't talk to us tonight. Bob, did you want to say a few words too? I'd like to introduce another man who's worked for the industry since 1979. He's seen every part of the industry. He's worked for several gas companies, even offshore drilling. He's a master driller. He's the man who's responsible on the drill rig for the activities that are occurring on that drill rig at any one time. And I'd like to introduce Robert Lee McLaren.
Thanks for that announcement, and I like that last name. These people that are sharing these stories, it's real. It's real. Okay, and like you said, I started out in the industry in '79, and I watched Pennsylvania come through. Well, Colorado was just so much gas, we didn't have enough to pipe it through. So I kept sending these hands to Pennsylvania. There's a lot of hands that came from Colorado. And then when it slowed down in Colorado, and then you had a split tail, North Dakota, Pennsylvania. So I kind of feel the responsibility here, you know, of this action that's being taken place, since it's a long road that we've been traveling. And I guess that's when Mac actually I had a revelation up there in Prattsburg when a young man came and he shared his story. And I went there because this young man really touched the heart of Pennsylvania. And I see him here tonight, and that's very honorable, very respected. And I learned a lot from him. Been out of the industry for 3 years now, but it still don't go away, you know. And where we draw the line from Pennsylvania to New York, you know, you don't. You can't. They're our neighbors, you know. These guys are my family. I spent most of my time out there with the men, the crew, you know. That was my job to watch over. You know, my responsibility to keep them safe, make sure they went home at night, you know, back to their families. And now it's actually turned about. You know, and the next generation that don't know about what's ready to hit, it's our responsibility to set that roadmap. You know, they're going to talk about casing. And, you know, casing is a very thin wall. It's a very thin wall. And the more you use it, the thinner it gets. It's like a car on, you know, on salt roads. So the salt roads, the more you use it, the more it's going to wear out. So our footprint's already here. It's time to take the responsibility to those people. Let them lead us out of this. You know, turn the card. You know, you got to just keep continuing to say no. You know. That's about what I got to share right now, because these guys really touched home. Thanks.
One of the things I heard tonight I've never heard before, and it was over dinner, and I would bet that most of the people in the audience are in the same boat. I learned that now they have the technology and they're actually using it to drill down 1,500 feet, 2,000 feet or more, and then go laterally up to 7 miles, and in some cases even further than that. I was telling Mac, who told me that my best information up to this point in time was that max they could go is 3 miles, and they very infrequently went 3 miles because they didn't get the productivity and it was very expensive to go that far. But he says, Jack, you're behind the curve. That was a few years ago, like what, 4 or 5 years ago. They now have the capability to go that far. So. You think of this drilling that potentially would come into this area. Is there anybody in the room that has the technology to tell where that wellbore goes in terms of where your property is located, 7 miles away from a well? I think those are the kinds of things that we need to think of. The other thing I wanted to bring up, Mac and I had a conversation about Randy going into these trucks, and we had a film the other night. Unfortunately, it didn't make it here tonight, But it was an industry film that was showing a workman going into one of these tanks and doing exactly what Mac had talked about, scraping down the sides of these tanks. And for those of you who studied this issue, you know that in the wellbore, over time, you get radioactive scaling on that pipe, on that wellbore. And eventually, even though they use acids and other things to remove it, they pull that wellbore out and ship it off to a hazardous waste facility. Well, you can imagine the same thing happening in a residual waste tank that's filled with this water, this flowback water that's coming up. And over time, it too builds a scale. So this man was sent in without really any protective gear. They did have a thin paper hazmat suit that he was in, but what's it called? Tyvek's suit, but no respirator, and they put a rope around his waist, the function of which is to pull him out if he succumbs to the fumes. So the industry film we saw last night was exactly that. They have so much arrogance to actually put that in a training film, and you see the man going into this opening with no protective gear on, as if that's the way it's done. So I just wanted to add that note. Okay, our next presenter tonight has distinguished herself in New York State by speaking out on the health assessments that are from the perspective of the whole medical community in New York State, as exemplified by the New York State Medical Society and many local medical societies, the call for a comprehensive health impact assessment in New York State around these very issues that you've heard tonight, around the inability for us to gain access to the chemical nature of what's going down in these well bores, and also what's coming out, even more so, as to what you do with it. Her name is Larissa Dreska, close enough? And she's a graduate of, and I think, I'm not going to go through her entire bio here. You've received that and can refer to it in the middle of the program. She's a tremendous advocate for public health. She's testified before the New York State Assembly on health, and has also testified before the New York State Democratic Caucus, as well as testifying in Washington on health assessment needs in the nation. So I'd like to introduce to you Larissa Dreska.
Thank you. First, thank you for the testimony that you've delivered. I think this really is the first time that we've heard from the workers and people who are so directly impacted in one place. So I hope to do some justice today to describing some of the health impacts.
John!
Kid from beginning.
Yeah. Kid from beginning?
Kid from beginning.
Over on the left.
There you go.
I see.
All right.
Thank you.
Where's Washington?
You can tell we're not a techie.
So I think most of you are familiar with the process of gas drilling, conventional versus unconventional wells. What we're talking about here is the unconventional process, which means using a ton more, tons more water, chemicals, and silica sand. Impacts are also going to be tons of times greater. So it's the magnitude of the process. And also what we're talking about is from the process from cradle to grave. That means extracting the silica sand, bringing it to the location where the gas drilling is going to be done, transporting the water, transporting the chemicals, transporting the C4 as we heard, transporting the equipment and locating it, padding it, then drilling the well. Afterwards, there's a potential for, or during any of those processes, there's a potential for the accident and also for spills. Following that, there's the disposal of waste that we have to worry about that might potentially impact us, and also the transport of the ultimate product and the consumption of that ultimate product. So problems can occur at any of those points, but what I'd like to do is mainly talk about who can be impacted. And these slides are a progression of in Bradford County, the wells that have been drilled since 2008, and it's just to give you an idea of what the well development is in Bradford County, Pennsylvania. So up to October of 2012. In order to develop this many wells, you need to also put infrastructure in place. And this is a picture of the infrastructure that's been put into place that includes the water impoundments, water withdrawals, compressor stations, processing plants, pipelines, vertical and horizontal wells. And what they don't show you are the places where water has been contaminated. This is just an unofficial survey that was done by my colleagues at Damascus Citizens. They walked along Route 514 in the south central part of Bradford County, and they found that there were, this was September 2011, 92 wells that had been impacted, where people had water buffaloes, where they had chemicals that had been found in their blood or in their water or methane. So who are the people who might be impacted? I mentioned the places where these problems can occur, but who are the people who could be impacted? Well, that includes people in the areas where the silica sand is being mined, and that's Wyoming for the most part, and Minnesota. The silica sand has to be transported, usually via rail car, brought to the location. We've seen silica sand being offloaded behind daycare centers. The trains will stop at the depot right behind a daycare center, offload. Impacts are now being looked at by National Institute for Occupational Safety and Health, the impacts on the workers, but the residents and the children who are going to be breathing this polluted air from the silica are not being looked at. People who are downwind, people who use the water, people who use the gas, and of course the workers, as we've started to hear about. These are the determinants of health, what cause a person to be healthy or to be susceptible to illness. And so we know that our DNA and our age and in general, our lifestyle, we know that these are things that impact how we come out and how we eventually live, how healthy we are. But what science has found is the two most important determinants of health are the social and community impacts and also the environmental impacts. So those are the two that I'm going to be speaking about, and as it turns out, those are the two determinants of health that are most impacted by the gas drilling. So what are some of the community stressors? Well, there are stressors that have been observed about concerning road safety and workers, and I have a separate slide just about the workers, because that's really a very significant problem that has not been really identified and spoken about in the past. Housing has become unaffordable, as you mentioned, Mac. And that has been documented in literature. So landlords know that they can get a lot greater amount of money from the workers, so they will displace the families that have lived in these homes for a long time. This displacement causes a unraveling of the social network of a community. So displaced people from housing that has become unaffordable, from homes where the water has become contaminated. So it also causes a rift, as you know, as many of the people from Pennsylvania here can attest, causes a rift within the community. Those who say my water is fine and I've made some money, but they don't really mention that part of it, my water is fine, and those whose water has been polluted. So those homes are unmarketable. People totally lose the economic benefit from it, and that is also a major problem. Environmental and social justice concerns, such as vulnerable populations, those are supposed to be addressed according to directives by executive order. So children need to be protected from environmental risk, and so should low-income populations and minority populations. But gas drilling often occurs in rural, underserved, and poorer populations, near these vulnerable populations. So also people who are already under stress because they're poor or because they're underserved are at greater risk and will have a greater impact to their health if they're exposed to environmental toxins. That has been documented. That stress of an underlying either illness or socioeconomic status, if they're stressed in addition with an environmental stressor, they will react worse to that than someone who is otherwise healthy. So this is the OSHA, OSHA information for workers in the gas industry. We know that truck traffic is a cornerstone of this industrialization. You know, hundreds of truck trips a day. Actually, per frac, it's 1,600 one-way truck trips. CDC, Centers for Disease Control, tell us that transportation accidents are the leading cause of occupational fatality in the mining industry. And we know for a fact that from data from National Institute for Occupational Safety and Health, that the gas and oil industry has 8 times the premature on-the-job mortality rate than at the average job in the United States. So, and the actual data is this. Between 2003 and 2008, 648 oil and gas workers were fatally injured, and that's how they came up with the fatality rate, knowing how many oil and gas workers there were. So half of them, the reason for the deaths were highway crashes, and also workers struck by objects and equipment. So this will also have an impact on the community. Workers will come and live in the community, and they're going to bring whatever assets or whatever woes come with them to the community. It will impact the community character and the resources. So we also know that unhealthy behaviors such as drug abuse and crime often accompany the influx of new workers, which also affects the lifestyle of the community. So the silica sand is what is used currently in the fracturing process, which comes from the Midwest. It causes silicosis, which is a preventable disease, but it's incurable once you get it. So it's considered an occupational lung carcinogen, And there's evidence that inhaling it can cause chronic obstructive pulmonary disease that can also be later be complicated by tuberculosis or other infectious diseases. Also, these workers will bring their clothes home or to the laundry, laden with the silica dust, so thereby exposing their family or community. So the National Institute for Occupational Safety and Health has begun to look at the workers, but nobody's looking at the residents. Workers have rights. They should exercise them, and I think we're beginning to see that happening. They should do it without retaliation and discrimination. Every year, the Pew organization puts out county health rankings for every county in the United States, and these are the rankings for the counties that are slated to be drilled first. I'll start with my county, Sullivan County in New York. We are 61st out of 62 counties for health outcomes, with the Bronx being number 62. So, but the dark green are the counties that are in the lowest percentiles or lowest rankings. So that includes Chemung County, which is 60th. Broome County is 56th in health rankings. Steuben County is 53rd. And Chenango County is 33rd. Tioga is standing pretty well in health outcomes at 17. So you can see that the southern tier counties are not doing well already as far as...
What's the number for Skyline? I can't read it.
Well, I can't tell you right now, so because I can't see with my, I'll tell you later when I can look it up, all right? So exposing to the vulnerable populations to environmental and community impacts has the potential to put them under further stress. As I mentioned before, you're already under stress from being poor or unhealthy. This is going to impact you worse. So the other part of this is of the determinants of health. Besides the social and community impacts, environmental impacts are very, very significant. And so we'll start with air pollution, calling your attention to two recent peer-reviewed articles. So the science is beginning to call attention to some of the pollutants. It's taken a while for the scientists to come up with some of this information, but they have. And so we have some peer-reviewed papers now from University of Colorado School of Public Health and also from Theo Colburn's the Endocrine Disruption Exchange. And what they're finding is, so air pollutants do exist. There are increased concentrations around well pads, and they can cause the accumulation of them. For example, benzene is a carcinogen, and so there's a good possibility that cancer-causing agents are, that we know that they are in higher concentration. We can't measure the rate of cancer as yet because, as you know, cancer takes at least 20 years in many cases to develop. And so we won't have those statistics for 20 years, but we have to take some precautionary measures. These are some of the sources of air pollutants. The National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Agency that I showed you the slide before puts out data that shows, has shown that the air of Wyoming and Utah, the Uinta Basin, is worse for ozone with a reversal. So in the wintertime, they're seeing extremely high ozone concentrations. And they're seeing higher concentrations of ozone than they have seen in Los Angeles during the extreme air pollution. Children are especially vulnerable because their lungs continue to mature, and if they mature in the presence of ozone, they become brittle like that of an elderly adult. They're also associated, air pollution also is associated with neurodevelopmental delay, lower IQ in babies born to mothers who were exposed to polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons during pregnancy, and also learning disorders in exposed children. And the World Health Organization has classified diesel exhaust as a definite carcinogen. There are also, besides just the drilling rigs, there are also the pipelines that emit, that leak. We've seen pictures of the methane leaks, a company by the name of Gas Safety, and another research group, I believe from Boston University, has shown graphs of what the spikes of methane leaks in large cities looks like, and it's very, very dramatic, contributing to ozone as well. Yesterday, Vera and Craig took us around to see some of the stations, compressor stations, and drilling areas in Susquehanna County. And we saw the structures, but we didn't see this material coming out, because this can only be detected using a special infrared camera called a FLIR camera. Water contamination is something that has occurred. There are documented cases of it. We know that methane has leaked, and there are 2 studies showing the mechanism from Duke University and Caltech as well, Cal State. They have also, water contamination has also been demonstrated by Drs. Bamberger and Oswald in their recent paper. What they found was that their objective was to do a study that showed that animals were the sentinels of disease, especially of the water contamination and chemical exposure. And so a few of the examples were the death of 17 cows that had been exposed to hydraulic fracturing fluid that died. There were 2 cases of controlled experiments, meaning one herd of cows was in a field that didn't have any contamination. In the other field, they drank water that had been contaminated. Many more stillbirths, spontaneous abortions, and deaths in the cows that gave birth. Well, congenital malformations in the ones that gave birth, but otherwise deaths and illness in the ones that drank contaminated fluid. And they have a number of other examples, including pets that had drunk from along the side of roads where waste water had been spread as a dust preventer. So there's the association that's made, but the exact pathway of exposure hasn't been determined, and that's what needs to be done. That's the next big step for the science community, is to show the pathways of exposure, and the government really could help with that. This shows some of the possible mechanisms, which include poor casing, and as we know, casing failures occur in 6 to 9% of all gas wells drilled and cased immediately. There's a 50% failure rate in 15 years, and in 50 years, they all fail. They're man-made materials, and they're sometimes flawed to begin with, but because they're man-made, they will always fail in time. There are also possible routes of contamination through extended fractures. New York State is riddled with faults and fractures, and so a fracture can extend into an existing, a fracture made by the hydraulic fracturing can extend into a fracture that's already existing. And then also there are abandoned wells. You have a large number of vertical wells that have been drilled and abandoned, and many of them are not even, you don't even know where they are. And so those are conduits for contamination as well. The chemical mix is what is really received quite a bit of attention, partly because Dr. Theo Colburn has called attention to the chemicals. So what we see here is the staging area. We saw something close to that yesterday when Vera and Craig took us around. So the frac chemicals are apparently stored in those containers that are circled. But on the right-hand side there is one cow of the 17 cows that died from drinking that hydraulic fracturing fluid. And what they found in there were petroleum hydrocarbons and quaternary ammonium compounds plus other toxins. So they've been able to figure out that there was an association between hydraulic fracturing fluid and these sentinels of toxicity, for the toxicity. So the reason we don't know more about them, why Dr. Theo Colburn had to search around on material safety data sheets and go around and look at spills and actually investigate materials material that was spilled, is because these chemicals are called proprietary. There was a nurse that was exposed to hydraulic fracturing or some fluid from a spill at a well site. The driller came in, he was fine. They had taken off his clothes and she was taking his vital signs and treating him, but she had a reaction, a more severe reaction than he obviously did. And within 2 days, she was in the intensive care unit of her hospital with multiple organ failure, and she almost died. So people will have different reactions, and you never know when who that person is going to be. It could be a strapping, healthy man, or it could be a child. Just your constitution does not predict how you're going to react to a particular chemical. So these are just some of the chemicals that are used. All of them are really toxic: carcinogens, neurotoxins, endocrine disruptors. Endocrine disruptors, by the way, function at parts per million, parts per billion, even parts per trillion. Sometimes the smaller the dose, the more effect the endocrine disruptors have. One such chemical is 2-butoxyethanol that is used throughout the whole life cycle of the well, and Dr. Theo Colburn has described all of the stages during which 2-butoxyethanol is used. And it's extremely toxic. It's for foaming, it's used for foaming, it's used for drilling, it's used for, used as Corexit in the Gulf for, as the dispersant. And what we know is that it's a carcinogen. It also causes blood dyscrasias, which means it breaks up your red blood cells and it can cause bleeding in your various organs. That's all some of the people who were exposed to it had. But the cancer part of it is not going to come out for a good many years hence. And this was, I've spoken a little bit about Dr. Theo Colburn. She's been a great hero on the chemical front. And most recently, she and her group have written this paper on the air, on the chemicals in the air. The main part about this particular paper that I took away is that these chemicals have multiple symptoms. So one chemical can cause rashes, and also have some neurotoxic effects, and also have effects on your cardiovascular system. So it's kind of across the board. So when you're seeing somebody with a range of complaints, it's hard to say it's from a particular chemical because they're rather nondescript at times. Headaches, a little bit of dizziness, just not feeling well. It's hard to pinpoint it on one chemical. So you really do need to have the data that says what kind of chemical it is. It's great to also have that pathway of exposure. Waste is another problem. The best way at this point, according to industry, is to, since they, it's a little bit more difficult, let's say, for them to get it into the wastewater treatment plants. They lose it. It's easy for them to lose it. I think Mac would describe to you how easy it is and how he's heard about it being lost. whether in a stream or whether on a road or at a gas station, not a gas station, but at a rest stop. Somebody would go in for lunch and turn the spigot and lose that water, would end up in the stream. So there's really currently no safe way to dispose of it, but there are injection wells that are readily used, and the problem with those is that they cause earthquakes, among other things. Plus, we also don't know which way, how the contaminants are going to move, because they often go into wells that have been previously used to extract gas from other formations. And so there could be pathways established for contamination because they were drilled into faults and fractures. So the geology really needs to be understood, and that's really not the case. We need to have a much better awareness of what the geology is in New York State. We've known that the Marcellus Shale, which is what we have underneath here, you also have Utica, but the Marcellus is highly radioactive, more radioactive than any other shale. And we have measurements in the tens to hundreds of thousands of picocuries per liter for some of the radium that's coming at the wellhead of Marcellus shales. There are recommendations from the International Atomic Energy Agency on how workers are to conduct themselves around potentially radioactive. First of all, they should be wearing dosimeters. They should be wearing respirators. They should be wearing protective suits. I've seen slides of what the workers look like in Norway, and they look completely different from the workers that we saw yesterday. So even though we belong, as the United States, we belong to the IAEA, we don't really conform to their recommendations for workers. On the other hand, we've given them exemption. We've given the industry exemptions from anything that comes from downhole. Nothing that comes from downhole has to be regulated. And vertical wells, if they're drilled into Marcellus formations, can produce radioactive waste as well. This, I'd like to call your attention to our area, where the red indicates radon concentrations. Average radon being in the red areas of 4 picocuries per liter, which is actionable. Actually, 0 radon is safe. But if you have a radon of 4, you definitely have to take some action in your home. Reduce the radon concentration by venting it, getting rid of the radon from your home. Radon is the leading cause of lung cancer in non-smokers, and the second leading cause of lung cancer in non-smokers. So it's a very big problem. 21,000 deaths a year are from radon exposure. So radon enters your body through inhalation. It's exhaled, most of it, prior to doing any harm, but it becomes polonium and lead. That's the decay product. And those are the elements that stay within the lungs, and those are the elements that cause the cancer. So radon needs to be monitored. The other problem with the radon is, since the Marcellus gas is so radioactive, if you bring in Marcellus gas for you to use in your stoves, it's going to increase the radon that's already present in the basements of your homes. I hope all of you have had the radon in your homes tested as a baseline, because it's an important public health issue, even without the Marcellus shale, just simply because you live in a high radon area. And there is mitigation for it, so you can take care of it if you do have high radon. Just want to give you, accidents and explosions also affects your view shed and your food shed, and 1,000 trees per acre usually cut down from a forested area. That's a lot of trees. This is Wyoming, just to show you the development over the course of a few years. And we're concerned, medical doctors are concerned, because the information, the public health information, is still scant. The peer-reviewed research is coming, but there's not enough of it yet. We need to have, people coming forward. Yesterday, one of the things that I wanted to bring forward is a survey, and I'll speak very briefly about it in just a moment, and I know I'm running short on time. But one of the big reasons that we are limited in the information is because we have exemptions from public health laws. So especially key parts of the most important public health laws that were instituted during the Nixon administration, really, to protect the environment and public health. So over the course of the subsequent years, oil and gas industry have received enough exemptions that the federal government is really not tracking the health impacts, which is really of great concern. The New York medical organizations have come to the conclusion that this is not safe as it's currently done in other states, and they don't want it to be done here because it appears to be unsafe, and until it can be proven safe, we don't want it here. And these are some of the organizations that have spoken up for a moratorium. It includes the Medical Society of the State of New York that just this month came out with a resolution asking for asking again for a moratorium. First time they did that was in 2010, so asking again for it, and this time also asking for a health impact assessment. American Academy of Pediatrics of New York State was at the forefront from the very beginning, supporting the first moratorium from 3 years ago. Mount Sinai Children's Environmental Health Center. Now this is what the development looks like in Pennsylvania and Colorado. It doesn't look like this here, and we want to keep it from looking like this here. And yet, in New York, our doctors are speaking out, and in Pennsylvania and Colorado, they just get gagged. So, Damascus Citizens for Sustainability has put together a survey, and we'd like to bring this to the people who are impacted so that they can fill this out and send their petitions for a consultation to the Agency for Toxic Substances and Disease Registry. The federal government simply doesn't know what is happening as far as health impacts. People are afraid. We're willing to come and speak to the people to encourage them that this is to their benefit, to make the federal government aware of what's happening. And we don't have fracking in New York because of a law that we have, and you probably are all aware of it. You've probably all written comments on the SGIS. And this is what doctors have said is wrong with it, all those parts in red. Just as an example, they didn't talk about children, they didn't talk about air impacts to different populations, they didn't talk about waste disposal, they didn't give any reason to be concerned about radioactivity, and yet we know all of those are the case. The setbacks are terrible, they're not protective, especially for children. And there is a process that can assist in the decision making. It should be done before any decision is made. It should be done in a transparent, comprehensive, and inclusive way, inclusive of all stakeholders, all the people who could potentially be impacted, and that's called a health impact assessment. And there are great benefits and advantages to doing a health impact assessment over just the health review that the New York State Department of Health is currently doing. And these are just some of them. So we're in a unique situation here in New York. We have the opportunity to make the decision, to inform the decision in a way that's scientific, that's problem-based, that's peer-reviewed, based on peer-reviewed literature, based on science. And we feel that it would be inclusive of the most vulnerable people. We would make sure that there are no exemptions, and we would also be adhering to the precautionary principle. Thank you.
And that's what a passionate, board-certified pediatrician sounds like. And all of the people that you've heard tonight and the subsequent person you're going to hear in a minute are volunteers. They come here without asking a cent. If they were to be employed by someone to come and spend the time that they've spent with us, we wouldn't be able to afford them. We're going to pass a hat around and ask you to contribute as much as you can, not only for the expenses of bringing them in, but for the potential of extending these forums. We're talking about taking them down into Pennsylvania as well. The workers have requested that we formulate a panel to go down into Pennsylvania and to confront the folks that are living in those communities and potentially give them some hope of moving beyond where they are at this point in time. I'd also like to recognize the fact that in the crowd here are several volunteers that likewise have expended their time in putting together the logistics that are required for presenting a program such as this. And could those folks please stand that have been involved in that, and could we give them a round of applause? Okay, perhaps some of you know about Act 13, and many of you probably know about Act 13. It's one of the most insidious pieces of legislation I've ever seen offered in a state whereby actual medical professional doctors are gagged from discussing what kind of chemical contamination their patients have been exposed to. We have the privilege tonight to hear from an attorney who has been facing with her clients the impact of that act in Pennsylvania. She comes from a law firm that's dedicated itself to serving the interest of the environmental community in the planning and in the implementation of those kind of protections which Act 13 would attempt to override. It's my privilege to introduce Lauren M. Williams.
I don't know. It's a... All right. See, lawyers can do something. Okay. We can't do math, but we can work the computer. It's a pleasure to be here. Jack just said, my name is Lauren. I come from a smaller size law firm down in Doylestown, Pennsylvania. And we work with individual affected landowners, community and environmental groups and municipalities with permit appeals, developing and defending stronger local ordinances. We were heavily involved in trying to get back our zoning ability after the state tried to really override it in Act 13. And as I am only licensed to practice in Pennsylvania and New Jersey, I will be focusing on Pennsylvania law today. So without further ado, what I'd like to do today is talk a little bit about the physician restrictions, also known as the physician gag rule. That was part of Act 13. There's also some chemical disclosure provisions that go along. They're also in the bill, but I'm going to be focusing on the physician parts today. So what I'd like to do is first talk a little bit about where some people think these restrictions might have come from, and then also talk about the enactment process in Pennsylvania for these restrictions, which I can give you a preview. The enactment process was very short. Then I'd like to get into the gag rule itself, what it actually does, and then get into the response from the medical and scientific community, that some of the general concerns that were raised or have been raised by the way that the law was written, and some of the court challenges that have come up. So let's go. There's been some thought that the kind of the genesis for these restrictions is a piece of model legislation from a group known as ALEC. This is the American Legislative Exchange Council. They are known more to be a more corporation, business-friendly organization that develops model bills ranging from agriculture issues to, I think, there was one state that recently fought against an attempt to repeal their renewable energy standards. And the physician restrictions are thought to be a component of one of these model bills. Similar laws or regulations have been seen in at least 3 other states, Pennsylvania, Colorado, which was a regulation, Texas, and Ohio. Texas is, from what I've seen of a comparison of the model bill in Texas, they're almost identical. Colorado's is a little bit different from the comparisons that I've seen, but Pennsylvania's law looks a lot more like Colorado's regulations. As far as Act 13 itself, what became Act 13 started off primarily as HB 1950. There was also a Senate bill, and they kind of all merged into HB 1950. Just to give you an idea, HB 1950 was about this thick. It's about 100 and some pages long with 6 to 7 chapters, ranging from the impact fee and natural gas, like tax credit vehicle incentives, to the environmental regulations chapter, and then the local zoning. So there was a lot sandwiched into this bill. And the chemical disclosure and physician gag rules were added at the very last minute. So what happened is the House and the Senate, they voted and they didn't agree, so they made a conference committee. And when HB 1950 went into the conference committee around February 6th, based on the timeline that's on the legislature's website, the gag rule was not in the bill. Magically, when it came out, it had them in it. But as you can tell, there wasn't much conversation put into talking with physicians and talking to public health officials, toxicologists or epidemiologists as to what these provisions might actually do, whether they were too broad, too narrow. It just kind of ended up in the law. And there really wasn't much debate on it either, because once the report was introduced into the House and the State House and State Senate, it was passed out, approved in about a day, and sent to the governor to sign. And in fact, the governor has been quoted in one news article as saying that he doesn't even know how these restrictions got into Act 13, which is really a comforting thought. So what does Act 13 actually do? So the way that the law was written, the very plain language on the page. So as to the chemical information that the physician or nurse practitioner obtains from the operator, the law bars the physician or nurse practitioner from communicating that chemical information that they've gotten to the patient, to other treating physicians in their hospital or clinic, to a referring physician that the patient might need to go to for further diagnosis and treatment, to non-physician specialists. The toxicologists and epidemiologists may or may not be physicians, but whether they are or they aren't, they're very integral to the diagnosis and treatment process. They help kind of figure out what the patient might have been exposed to. Again, this idea of pathways of exposure, trying to determine what the patient has come down with and what we can do to help them and what got them into that situation to begin with. And so not being able to communicate what even the patient's been exposed to, if you can't tell that to the toxicologist or the epidemiologist, that really hinders the diagnosis and treatment process. It also does bar communications with public health officials. And, you know, we've gotten some response back saying, well, this is no different than existing federal law. It's actually broader than the federal laws. Some of the federal chemical disclosure laws, IPICRA, it stands for Emergency Planning and Community Right to Know Act. And then there's also the OSHA Hazard Communication Regulations. While these laws provide a measure of trade secret protection and confidential proprietary information protection for industries, it is nowhere near as broad as what is actually in Act 13. So there's a question there as to why does it actually sweep that much more broadly. In response to our pointing out to people that the plain language bars you from even telling the patient what they've been exposed to, we've gotten the response, well, that's of course not what it does. That's not what it does. Of course you can communicate it with the patient. Of course you can treat the patient. And we've gotten that response from some of the legislators who have been active or integral in putting the legislation together. And we've also gotten that from the Pennsylvania Department of Health. The problem, though, is if you don't read the words on the page of the bill, of the law, as to what it says, then a physician or a nurse practitioner don't actually know what they can do. They don't know who they can communicate the information to without getting into a catch-22 situation of either being sued perhaps by the patient or being sued by an oil and gas operator, which is not a pleasant thing to have to think about. So you have this question, can I tell the patient what they've been exposed to? Can I tell my other colleagues in my clinic that are also treating this person or trying to figure out what's wrong with them? Can I tell them, or do each of them have to go back to the oil and gas operator to get the same information, which interposes more and more time into perhaps an emergency situation? Can you talk with your toxicologist or your epidemiologist who, if they're not a physician, can't even get the information under Act 13? And there's another idea here about whether you can use the information that you've kind of gathered from the oil and gas operator and treated the patient with to create protocols in a clinic or in a hospital to speed up particularly emergency treatment. Let's say you have 3 people who come in with this same unique set of symptoms, and you find out from the information you get from the oil and gas operator that they've been exposed to the same exact chemical or chemical mixture. And you think to yourself, wow, okay, this is kind of a unique thing. We'll make a chart that says if this person comes in with X, then they've probably been exposed to Y, and this is what you can do. If you're under a confidentiality agreement, can you even do that? And if you don't read the law by the plain language, you absolutely don't know. If you read what it says, you probably can't. And so, again, it really puts the physician or the nurse practitioner in a situation where, you know, what kind of risk are we going to be taking on if we do what we normally do when we try to treat patients, or we have to do something else. So, as you would think, there are a number of concerns that have been expressed by the medical, scientific, and public health community because of the gag rule. And one of the primary things has been this idea in medicine of patient autonomy and the patient's right to the information. So when I think about this concept, I think of it, so when I'm a lawyer, I have a client and I'm trying to advise them on various options that they have. I advise them on the risk. I tell them, you know, here are your risks and here are your benefits, here's the information, and then the client is active in making the decision as to what they're most comfortable with. And there's that similar idea in medicine of working with the patient as an active participant in medical decision-making, which requires that they have all the information, including what they've been exposed to. And I'm not, you know, if I were a patient, even if this wasn't an idea, I would want to know what I was exposed to. And so the physician restrictions really interpose a barrier in the physician-patient relationship that wasn't there before, and really raises questions as to what are we going to have in terms of that relationship in the gas drilling communities. And that then kind of leads down into the second idea of informed consent claims and malpractice claims. If a patient hasn't been fully informed or feels like they haven't been fully informed as to the risks and to the information, they could say to the doctor, well, you didn't tell me, I wouldn't have chosen that option, I'm going to bring a lawsuit against you. And then the doctor is, again, in a situation, do I choose to be sued by my patient or do I choose to be sued by the oil and gas operator? A third, and again, these are all kind of wrapped up together, just generally thinking of ethical standards and the idea of do no harm to the patient. If a doctor is there in an emergency situation and they have to make the decision, well, I could treat the patient myself because I have the information, or I could send it to the patient to this outside doctor who I know has better experience with this, but they're going to have to go back to the oil and gas operator to get this information again. Again, it's another time, and in emergencies, there really isn't time. And so the doctor may choose to just treat the patient themselves. Is that then really the best option for the patient? And so it runs into this, how do we balance these issues that have been created? Another issue is in Pennsylvania, there are certain state laws regarding what has to be in medical records. If you have a state law that then comes in and says, for this particular piece of information, which would otherwise have to go into this medical record, what do you do with the state law then? Do you continue to, do you violate the one law and do you put it in the medical record, or do you leave it out of the medical record? And so, again, it's a very, yes, thank you. Rock in a hard place, catch-22, whatever you want to call it, it's not a pleasant situation. And I think I've already kind of addressed this issue of the barriers to diagnosis and treatment, but it places a number of barriers, whether it be between your other physicians and colleagues in a particular clinic or hospital, or the toxicologists and other public health professionals that are integral to kind of helping people, not only figure out what they have, but figure out how they can get better. And I've talked a little bit about the protocols aspect, but thinking more broadly in terms of scientific knowledge of health impacts, if you're in a community that has either gas drilling or other gas development activity, and you're become experienced in the types of issues that come in the door, you might want to at least, you now have this body, or more like a brain, of knowledge on the types of things that can come in the door. But if you can't communicate that initial chemical information, can you even let other people know about those health impacts? And as you might then guess, there's the large amount of risk and questions that come up. And when faced with risk, when physicians and other medical professionals are already under, particularly in some fields, you have malpractice insurance, you have other things. If you place this on top of those concerns already, are you going to be left with a situation where in communities where public health and medical infrastructure is already slim, are you going to have the good doctors leave? And you are leaving a community in need, even more in need. And in Pennsylvania, I was at a symposium about a month and a half ago, and someone was speaking as to the fact that in Pennsylvania, in terms of the state's public health network, framework, statewide, we're one of the worst in the nation. We have very few county boards of health. And so there's a lot of work that otherwise should be done by the state or a county board of health that either isn't being done or it gets done by nonprofits or hospital systems. So the question of serving communities in need really comes up with this situation by increasing the risk of being involved in them, in the communities. So in response to this situation of the risk and the questions that get raised, there have been two court challenges so far. The first one is Rodriguez versus Krancer, which is pending in the Middle District in federal court in the Middle District of Pennsylvania. Our firm does not represent Dr. Rodriguez, but we did file a friend of the court or an amicus brief on behalf of two organizations, Physicians, Scientists, and Engineers for Healthy Energy, and Physicians for Social Responsibility. Dr. Rodriguez's claims pretty much strike right at the communication restriction itself. He brought a related number of First Amendment claims, saying that it's a restriction on speech and it sweeps too far, or we simply don't know what we can say to our patients and to our physician colleagues and others. And as for in our amicus brief, what we did was we focused on some of the broader concerns that I just spoke about. These other, community impacts and the impact on medical care and good medical treatment in these areas. And the second case, which is probably more well known for the zoning part of it, is Robinson Township versus Commonwealth. And one of our plaintiffs was Dr. Kahn, who is a doctor in Allegheny County in Monroeville. And the claims in this case that related to the gag rule dealt more with some of these background issues, with one claim striking at the issue of why are these restrictions on doctors end up being more protective of this section of the oil and gas industry than other industries that use chemicals and that are subject to these other federal laws. Why do we have this more protective, this standard more protective of the industry? And then the second claim got at the enactment process, as to the fact that you have a restriction on doctors that got squished into a bill at the last minute that dealt primarily with oil and gas regulation. And we are still waiting to kind of see how this case will turn out. So at the Commonwealth Court, while we won on zoning, the zoning part at the Commonwealth Court, as for Dr. Kahn, he was dismissed due to lack of standing. And what that means, it just kind of generally, is we don't actually get to the two claims that I just spoke about. We appealed the denial of the dismissal due to lack of standing, and so we have yet to see whether we'll actually get to his claims. And we're still waiting to see what the Supreme Court will say. So keep your fingers crossed. And that's it. Thank you.
Well, I put that card somewhere. We have a special guest here tonight, and he has received the equivalent of the Nobel Prize for environmental activism in South Africa. We have the privilege of introducing I have the privilege of introducing Jonathan Deal. If you give a
Hi, welcome to all of you here, and thank you for having me here. I didn't plan to speak this evening, and I don't think that we want to get off the subject of health and fracking. It's one of the many aspects that I stand up to, and in South Africa I thought maybe just a little bit of background quickly. We've kept them at bay for 2.5 years, and we're going for 3 years. Royal Dutch Shell is leading the charge in South Africa, and 3 years ago they were talking about when we start drilling, this is where we will drill, that's what we're going to do. And if it wasn't for the internet and brave people and organized groups like Damascus Citizens, in fact Damascus Citizens for Sustainability was one of the very first groups that I contacted. That graphic of the Pinedale anticline or the Wyoming of the gas fields there, I used very effectively against Shell in public meetings. And we've got to a point where they don't even have an exploration license yet. There are 3 companies, Bundu, which was a South African company, sold out very quickly to an Australian company called Sunset Energy, which sold on to a subsidiary called Challenger. We have Falcon Oil and Gas, who have sold 50% of their shareholding in South Africa to Chevron, and of course Royal Dutch Shell. Those 3 applications in South Africa spanned an area of 230,000 square kilometers, about 170,000 square miles between those 3 companies. That is the area that they would like to drill in. And just like they do in the United States, they go around telling the public and the government officials how good they are, how concerned they are that the people in South Africa don't have electricity and that the country needs revenue and that their shale gas will solve the greenhouse emissions problems. The same pillars on which it's based here in the United States. So for the last 2.5 years I've been calling them out in public, calling them liars, writing to our government ministers in their cabinet meetings and telling the government that Shell is lying to them. And that's my job, is to get in their face. I'm not a scientist and I'm not an attorney, which gives me quite a lot of latitude in terms of the things that I say. So I wish they would sue me because we could use the publicity. This fight and the campaign brought me over to the United States by the generosity of the Goldman family and a family trust that was set up in 1984 and which has issued an environmental prize to 6 activists globally on each of 6 continents once a year. And it's taken quite seriously in the environmental community. What it's done for me is it's allowed our campaign to shift gears. And in November last year I was feeling very dispirited after just on 2 years of fighting, and many of you that are at grassroots level will know the feeling. You have the peaks and valleys and ups and downs, and every time you wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning, Shell are still there, like a great big amoeba, like a big growing tidal wave. They're ever present, omnipresent. And the call from the Goldman Prize Foundation came just at the right time, and it gave me a lot of encouragement. I had to keep it secret until the 15th of April when it was released. But what it did was it opened doors here, and I knew it was a global fight, but I didn't know how much of a global fight it was. And when I came across to the United States and started participating in that prize ceremony, because they take us around between San Francisco and Washington for 2 weeks, and they put on a big function at the San Francisco Opera House for about 3,500 people. They take us across the road to the City Hall, and 2,000 of the 3.5 stay behind to come and greet the prize winners. And the inspiration of having those ordinary people come and shake your hand and say thank you and keep on going, and we like your message and we want you to come and talk in the US as well, was an enormous inspiration. It opens doors, I think, at really high level, and I'm not naive enough to think that those open doors or the courtesy of being received will change a lot. But nevertheless, it lends a lot of credibility to the prize. I had the privilege of meeting the President last week, and senior people in EPA and government. There's a senator who I've known for a very short while, but I already love her to bits, Senator Pavley from Sacramento in California, and she has got permission for me to go to California in 10 days' time and tell my story in front of the Senate and the Governor of California, and hopefully try and influence some of the decisions that might be taken around the Monterey Shale there. So it's a global issue, and I don't think that from an activist point of view, and what we've seen tonight is one element of this opposition, one element of this campaign. I don't think that we can beat it country by country. I think it needs to be a global alliance Thank you. I think it needs to be a global alliance that belongs to everybody and belongs to nobody. I've watched too many people try and set up global alliances between France and Ireland and Australia and Poland and England and some organizations in the US, and you cannot hammer square pegs into round holes. There are established organizations that have charters, identities, ways of working, and what is necessary is a platform that allows people to cooperate right around the world. We have a little town in the Northern Cape, which is one of the areas that is eyed for by the fracking companies, called Williston, and there's a small town in North Dakota called Williston. And I draw that parallel because I want to illustrate how the Global Alliance could work. I would like somebody in Williston, North Dakota, to be able to say to their county supervisor, who might be trying to push something under the rug in terms of fracking legislation, you might think that this is going to be hidden or that you're going to get it through without resistance. But I'm promising you, on the strength of this global alliance of which we are a part, that your name and this decision and this town is going to be in the global news in 36 hours and be able to make it happen. And I want that to be able to happen in South Africa too. That is the only way that we will get the attention of the oil companies and the politicians, is in the media and at their soft underbelly. We cannot fight them on financial terms. So that's what I'd like to leave with you. I'm very keen to work at this alliance. I've crafted a document which I think can be signed by anybody from any individual to the largest organizations. It accommodates everybody. There's room for a Greenpeace, there's room for an environmental organization right on the other side of the scale, because it's an alliance idea that fits everybody. But we really need to work at it. I'm coming back here in August. I've been invited to attend a course on environmental economics at Stanford. And I intend to spend quite a bit of time in New York and Pennsylvania. And this is not about me. The money from the prize, by the way, which is $150,000, I have instructed the Goldman Foundation to pay it directly into the trust account of Treasure Karoo Action Group, which I represent. So there are people in our organization, just like in yours, and if the oil industry had any idea of how small it is, they'd be quite heartened, who have worked for years without a salary, qualified people. And for the first time in 2 years, some of them are getting a modest stipend. And I'm grateful to the Goldmans and to America for the opportunities that have been presented by this, and to you for allowing me to say hello tonight. Thank you.
I'd also like to ask if there are any public officials here tonight. Is there anybody that is on a planning board, a city council, county legislator? This is one of the most amazing things I've seen as I've traveled around the state in asking that question. Very rarely do we get elected officials here. So I think it's indicative of what we also must consider doing, is running our own and no longer avoiding those responsibilities that we need to take our government back. I work with a lot of organizations that are of the opinion that the only way we're going to stop this is to say no.
Yes, that's right.
And as you may know, there were several of us that were arrested recently over in Watkins Glen area who are saying no, and we hope to see that level of resistance grow in New York as well in other states, as I think putting our bodies, those of us who choose to do that, on the line is a necessary component of this. I'd also like to say thank our techies here tonight. John, would you stand, and you've been an essential part of putting this together. And the man who's already standing over here, Chris McConkey, who is a veteran. And I'm sorry I don't know all the other videographers back here except Vera Scroggins from down in Pennsylvania. And Craig Stevens, also from Pennsylvania, who's an NRA member and don't get it if it says no. Okay, we're going to move to the question and answer the segment of the program. So would the panel members please join me up here at the stage? And yeah, Doug Cruchon has an announcement.
For those of you who are activists in the audience, I'm sure you would agree that in our work around fracking, we don't have enough fun a lot of times. So come join us to look and listen to the bards who are going to poke fun at the companies who want to drill in our backyards. These are the poets against fracking, and we're going to have them at the Community Arts of Elmira this coming Friday at 7:30. There'll be an open mic. I'm going to try to get a couple of my own poems about fracking. Never done that publicly before, so this will be fun. But yes, everybody come. Thank you.
Yes, we do need some comic relief in this. Yes, Jane.
Jack, one of the things that I always appreciate about coming and getting new information is also being able to go home and actually have an action plan. Jack mentioned the folks who got arrested chaining themselves to the gates of Energy just north of Watkins Glen. In my town, Reading Central, we are trying very hard to stop the infrastructure, because if they don't have the infrastructure, they'll be less likely to come in. So I strongly encourage you to go to gasfreeseneca.com, read the material you find there. If you how many of you like Seneca Lake? Do any of you like Seneca Lake? Would you like to see it remain healthy?
Yeah.
Yes. Yes. Consider donating. That is an action plan that you can take that can help to build. We have, what's the name of the law? Earth Justice is going to represent Gas Free Seneca, but they need to bring in specialists. So we are building a legal fund in order to stop Energy and Arlington, their subsidiary, from bringing in natural gas in addition to the propane and butane. Thank you.
I'd like to request that you ask a question along with your comments.
I wasn't asking you a question.
Okay.
I
Woman over here in orange, and then this.
Hi, my name is Kathy Russell. I am a very strong trade union activist and have been since the 70s. I'm also part of the Workers' Center. We struggle for workers' rights. We're in Tompkins County, which is up the road a bit. And I am absolutely thrilled that workers are coming forward from Pennsylvania. I thank you from the very And I would like to know what my trade union can do and what the Workers' Rights Center can do to help support you.
Where do you begin? Just making people aware. Like I said, I don't think half these guys who work in the industry are even aware of how dangerous it is or what they're being exposed to. Forums like this, educating the people, I can only do what I can do, and anything I can do, I feel honored to be able to come here to help you guys, because like I said, I don't want to see what happened to us happen to you. What can you do? I don't really know. Just keep at it, keep beating the drum, keep doing what you guys are doing. Like, you know, like I said at the other meeting this time, you know, everybody says don't mess with Texas. Well, I'll tell you what, don't mess with New York, man. And that's really the truth.
Yeah.
That's really the truth. And it's people like that are committed like you guys that will stop it, you know, if you can push them back, just get it stopped. I mean, tell me, you guys have no idea the beast at the door. I mean, you really don't. Just make people aware, just basically. Really. Guess what? I need to start opening my mouth more. Yeah, right. But you know, like I just said, just keep doing what you're doing and make people aware. Yes, sir.
I identified a couple people over here first. Oh, okay. Yeah.
This is really the first time that the workers have come forward, and so we're going to try to document what they've said. You know, there are more people who are interested in coming forward, and there's also going to be a website called Gas Vets that
I'm sorry, gas what?
To give information to workers, labor information, violations, whom they could contact, NIOSH, and a lot of this information we want to get to NIOSH.
The other thing that to answer your question on the labor unions and what they can do is we're hoping to get some forms, as I mentioned before, going down at the request of these workers to talk to the people in Pennsylvania as well, because a lot of those folks are scared, they're fearful, they don't, gas companies are vengeful and they know it, so there's no avenue for them to hear this kind of message. So if you could get some of the workers that are affiliated with this industry that live in New York that are willing to go down there and speak out about their concerns, I think, especially when you hear these workers that are working 100, 110, 120 hours a week. I mean, this is just incredible to me that this industry is exempt from those labor practices of lower hours. Okay, there was a question, you know.
I'd like to elaborate on what he was discussing there about the hours. And the way Colorado did it was they split time. So if you work 86 hours, they just split your work week. So it's like the state and the oil refinery or the oil industry actually come to grips on it and says, well, they set their own standards, you know. So you only get 6 hours overtime, so that's the way it is. You know, basically, so the state and the oil refinery or the companies are working together. They don't know, you know, what's going on, but they set the regulations.
Okay, there's a gentleman in the back in the gray sweatshirt.
I'm not a public speaker, and I do get nervous. But first of all, I truly would like to thank the individuals from Pennsylvania for coming up and being forward. And when I say that, I challenge pretty much every day on the internet. I feel that that's doing my part. And I've discovered some really unique things. I'm not a computer expert, I'm self-taught. I've learned as I've gone along, but I can tell you I've had some pretty unique attacks on my computer in doing what I do. I'm not really afraid of the industry. I don't have anything to lose. But what I am afraid of is what I hear tonight.
Do you have a question, sir?
I do have one question.
Okay.
I have a pet peeve with the fracking stand. It's unloaded 2 blocks away from me here in Elmira. One of the side things that I've become aware of is with the fracking sand, there might be asbestos mixed with it. Can anyone give me any more information on that?
believe there's anyone up here that can answer that. Have you heard that there's asbestos coming with it, or that it's mixed in, or?
That's what I've been told. And
who's told you this?
to my understanding, Mr. Ingraffia, last meeting we had here in
that's a rather authoritative source, so yeah.
One that I highly respect.
Yeah. Next question. I think there was somebody right in this area. Yes.
The people that need to hear from the workers are the elected officials. There aren't any here, of course. Mostly our county legislature, our state legislature, our governor. Could you gentlemen who have been in the fields and have these experiences, can you go talk to them?
Yeah, we could, but I was supposed to meet a few weeks ago with Governor Cuomo's Dr. Shaw, and I think, what was it, a half hour after he was told that Randy and I were going to meet him at Center City, he canceled.
This is Commissioner of Health.
Yeah.
State Commissioner of Health.
Well, yeah, what I'd like to do, honestly, is get everybody together, or just me and Randy and a few others, and go to Albany and see him.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah.
Okay, here, gentleman who raised before, here, here, and here.
Yeah.
I don't know if I'm going to keep it.
Thank you all for coming. This is about the fourth one of these sessions I've been to. And I won't give you the whole history of how my thought process on this has drifted, but tonight I'm getting pissed.
Yeah.
And Laura, I got a question for you. If we all understand, you know, the purpose of government is to protect the people. And I cannot understand how a legislator in the state of Pennsylvania could look his constituents in the eye and say, I just voted on something that's going to make you hard to get better if you get sick. I mean, how did this happen? And I got answer that, and I got another question.
Okay. Well, I don't know if you heard about the Super Bowl trip that the legislators went on, but several of them got a full expense paid trip down to the Super Bowl or something of that nature. I don't remember the exact details, but it was in the newspaper. And I totally agree with you, and that's what's written in our Constitution in Pennsylvania and in the United States, that government is ours, and we create government to secure our rights and our communities, and that's not what's going on. And so it's up to us to figure out what to do about it. I know in Pennsylvania we help people create stronger local ordinances, but many other people have different strategies that they may prefer to use. But I completely agree with you that our government is not acting in our best interests.
Well, it would seem to me a legal challenge would be a cakewalk for an attorney. Yeah, you're smiling. Don't answer. We don't want to hear it. The other thing is, we've heard from PhDs, we've heard from guys now who won the equivalent of a Nobel Prize in this country. We've heard from attorneys, we've heard from physicians, and there's many fora like this going on in the state, in many. This to me would be a jaw-dropping episode of 60 Minutes. And this would be another Aaron Brockovich movie someday. And I'm just wondering why it's regional attention and not national attention. I mean, I don't know the mechanism to bring something to the network's attention, but
a couple things
incredible. You know, interview you, and you know, and there's probably 1,000 other guys like you. 10,000 who don't have the courage to do what you're doing.
Yes.
Yeah.
There's a couple things that come to mind. The governments, we shouldn't fear our governments. Governments should fear the people. And we have, afraid, a fear of our government right now because they've been infiltrated by corporate lobbyists, and corporations actually run this country. So I don't think there's any question of that. And I think more and more people are becoming aware of it and are willing to stand up and speak out on it. And everywhere I go, I hear that reiteration of corporate control in our government. So I think we are facing a watershed time in history, and that's why we're participating. That's why I think this passion exists in the guts of so many people today. So it's another question, and I'm going to try.
He had a little bit of a response to this gentleman's question, I think.
Yeah, that's where it was gonna go, but yeah, it's hit and miss on the media too, you know. Like, cyclone burnt down 3 rigs out there in Parachute area. You know, you only got one news flash, 6 o'clock. I watched it burn from the top of the hill all week long.
Parachute, Wyoming.
Colorado.
Or Colorado.
Garfield County.
Woman here in blue sweatshirt. Would you please introduce yourself too, please?
I'm Iris Marie Bloom. I'm with Protecting Our Waters, also from Pennsylvania. And I wanted to thank Mac and Joe for all the traveling you're doing and speaking out and all the courage that takes. And have a moment to thank Randy, who is not here because he's so sick. And just a couple of things quickly. People are asking, you know, what about Pennsylvania? We do have, we're delivering over 100,000 petitions for a moratorium in Harrisburg, which is the largest number of petitions on anything that's been taken to Harrisburg in a decade. This coming Tuesday, Mac will be there, Randy will be there if he's well enough. Y'all come from New York to swell the crowd if you want. It's hard to get a big crowd on a Tuesday. We've had 10 demonstrations so far in April, so people are getting a little bit tired, so come on down. In terms of how that gag order got into that law, it was Pennsylvania Environmental Council that inserted it, and people should know that, because PEC takes money from the gas drillers, and they have also sat down with the gas drillers and said, we're going to set up this Center for Sustainable Shale Development, which is this fluff kind of certificate program that the big industry, Chevron and Shell and so on, have sat down with organizations like Pennsylvania Environmental Council. So we have that problem as well. And I'm coming to my question. So related to that, we have a problem also in Pennsylvania. We don't have our medical society speaking out. We don't have, you know, even the breast cancer groups are saying the industry is fine. I mean, it's ridiculous. So I'd like to hear the success story of how the New York Medical Society took such a strong stand.
And before that happens, I'd like to recognize Iris Marie Bloom, who's a heroine in Pennsylvania. Yeah.
It was education and advocacy on the part of several of us in the medical profession who took the time to write letters to Governor Cuomo, spend time in Albany, and speak to the press, speak at fora like this. So I think getting the word out about the issue is very important, but also going to the people. I spoke to the Medical Society of Sullivan County, where I live. And subsequently those physicians signed on to a number of our letters. So you actually have to go to where the doctors practice. They have very little time. When we got the signatories to our individual letters, it was by personal referral. Somebody knew a doctor and they asked them to sign on to our letter. And that's how we accumulated the number of doctors that we did. In this final letter, all of our letters, by the way, are on our website that Sandra, Mary, and I founded, which is called Concerned Health Professionals of New York. And all of our letters from the medical profession, documented and delivered to the governor, are there. So please, continue to share the information with your doctors. They need to have that information just as much as the average citizen.
Okay. Here, body, and
Just one more thing. We, through Physician Scientists and Engineers for Healthy Energy, we have a CME course for medical professionals now that was done with the Medical Society of the State of New York. And so we invite anybody to take a look at it, but doctors and nurses can actually get continuing medical education credits for taking this course.
Okay, I'm just going to give you, I just have a question about Article 13. About 2 years ago, I live in...
Who are you, Peter?
Peter Gamba, Committee to Preserve the Finger Lakes. Sorry about that, I forgot my name.
Who are you?
About 2 years ago in the town of Jerusalem in New York, up in Yates County, I was driving down a road about 4 or 5 miles from my house, and they were cleaning out an old vertical well. And they had a big sign there. I think it said, hydrogen sulfide, stay away. Okay? And I drove, I took pictures of it, I have pictures of it, and the people working on it, the people working on the rig had no equipment on everything else, but there was a sign that said, hydrogen sulfide, stay away. Now the question I have to you is, if I am an employee there, and there's a big sign telling the community to stay away hydrogen sulfide, why can't I go to a doctor and say, I've been poisoned by hydrogen sulfide? And oh, by the way, is that under Article 13 where no one can talk about it? It's a public piece of information, and if I'm working on a rig and I know what chemicals are in there, why can't I tell the doctor, these are the chemicals I've been exposed to? That doesn't give him any power, and I mean, it gives the patient all the power. So I'm telling you, fix me for hydrogen sulfide. Can that be kept secret? That was my question.
Okay, so it's like, some of that might be better addressed to the doctor. But it is a very complex question. The way the gag rule under Act 13 works is it applies to the trade secret and confidential proprietary information. As far as something on a sign, you know, I'm not sure. But the part that I didn't get to go into today is the other piece that was inserted in, which is called the chemical disclosure part, but I like to really just call it the chemical non-disclosure part, because it only applies to a very small segment of the actual putting of the fracturing fluid in the ground. In fact, the disclosure part only applies to the chemicals that get put in the fluid that go in the ground. Whereas typically, you expect to see exposure once it's come out, via an impoundment pit, a frac tank, a truck overturning, or evaporation. For instance, out in the West, they will use large evaporators to evaporate impoundment pits full of frac water. Is what we've seen. So as far as the gag rule, it applies to the trade secret and the confidential proprietary information, which under the law can actually be kind of a broad umbrella. But it's like I said, I'm more familiar with the actual gag rule part than the actual than this disclosure.
So just to make it clear, is since I'm an employee, I can't disclose what I think I've been exposed to the doctor, just like the doctor can't be. So it's everybody's gag.
I'm not quite sure. Unfortunately, I'm a little less versed in some of the work in the OSHA stuff. Yeah.
There should be a whistleblower protection for you.
I'm actually H2S certified, so the first thing you'll do is smell rotten eggs. Next thing you lose your senses, and next thing's death. So you're not going to be treatable.
Hydrogen sulfide.
Hydrogen sulfide. Certified.
Yep, and if you see that windsock, they always got a windsock on the end of your location there. So it turns whatever direction the wind's blowing. Run with it. Run to the wind.
Bonnie, I believe you're next.
Thank you. Bonnie Chalet from Chemung County here. I have a question for everybody in the audience. First of all, thank you very much for coming to speak tonight. I think it's been enlightening for all of us. I would like to ask everybody, who has read Collateral Damage by Tara Micel here in the, okay, a few. I would suggest that all of you read it. She is from Colorado. She wrote this book about 4 years ago of many of the problems.
What's her name?
Tara Micel, M-E-I-S-E-L-L. And she's spoken locally as well. But she, 4 years ago, was talking about the health issues in Colorado. And I think it's really an eye-opener. So in addition to what we have heard tonight, Tara's book, Collateral Damage, is a good one for all of us to read so that we don't become collateral damage.
Susan Walter, Horseheads. I think the audience would like to know why Joe is sitting back here instead of up front where he could be. He said just giving the presentation he gave earlier makes him cough and cough and cough. I think many of us have been fighting fracking for over 4 years, and we've been to many forums like this, and in every one we learn new things, as I did tonight from every single speaker. It's so rare, well, excuse me, it's the first time I've ever heard a worker speak.
Yeah.
And first I'll share one tiny thing that Joe said quietly in the next room. Just walking from his house to his mailbox, he can smell whatever's being emitted from the, is it compressor station or refinery? Refinery. He can smell it, and he can taste the metal taste in his mouth, just walking from his house to his mailbox and back. I think none of us have any idea what the reality is that they are living with. And we need to take these stories to our legislators and our neighbors and pass them on. So I have a question for you, Mac.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
You said that often somebody you worked for said, look the other way, or we'll take care of it. Could you please give us 2 or 3 examples of what we were not supposed to see?
I don't know why they hired me for a rig worker. They should have hired me for a fireman, because that's all I did was put fires out. With one crisis or another, one way, or just always something. Fluid spilling, frack, where the frack tanks are, guys falling asleep in the truck. How many hours? I don't know. How many gallons went over the wall, down the hill? I don't know. Like I said, I told you guys, if it doesn't make the light of day, it never happened. What you guys hear about, I guarantee you, it's just a small percentage of what the real picture is. It is what it is. Like I said, they all, they want to show that they're, they're good, responsible stewards, and they're good neighbors, and they want to promote this healthy atmosphere of, we buy the kids baseball uniforms, we have big days where the town, they want to come meet everybody in the town and get to know us. We're really not bad, and they're good, man. They got a good PR machine. What can I tell you? They're good. And I know this, that before they come here, they do such research for years back to lay the structure that when they do come in, there's little to no resistance, because the people have been bought off. Everything's already laid. The infrastructure's already been laid. So that's why they just come in and basically do what they want. And, if they get a little resistance, nothing a little bit more money can't take care of.
So, Mac, is that sort of what the discussion is among the workers as they've talked about how that structure gets laid into a community?
Yeah, it's just, you see things, I mean, I just know how they are. I mean, I've worked with them. I've seen it. To look the other way, to, get rid of the report, play ball, just don't make any waves. Like I told you, the first guy told me, just volunteer for everything, never say no, and you'll do good. And,
Sounds like a successful military person.
Yeah, I would have been on any elite unit, buddy.
Back here in black. And then over here.
Evening, folks. Craig Stevens in Pennsylvania. I'll make a statement first. We got tired of waiting for our elected officials, so they're not showing up. So I went to Harrisburg a month ago and started asking the senators to come that represent you guys. Yesterday, Vera and I toured with Dr. Druska. She was awesome yesterday, and here's Newsday today. That was just yesterday. Senator Carlucci, quote, this is why we did it. Following a trip to hydrofracking sites in Pennsylvania this week, State Senator David Carlucci says he will push even harder for health and environmental studies to be conducted in New York. Also on that trip was Senator Perkins and Senator Katchik. She's pretty new. Just so you know, I have 17 others that have communicated with us that want to come. That's 20. That's 1/3 of the senators that represent the state of New York. Here's why they're coming. You know why they're coming? Because I told them our elected officials have never come to communicate with us. I'm doing it for another reason, because we're going to go to Harrisburg next week. The people are going to go. We're going to call out our own elected officials and say, you won't even show up, but senators from other states will come. So and I want to shout out my new buddies, Lee, I met when I spoke a while ago to be here, and Mac, and Randy, who's not here, and Joe, and Dr. Druska, who has been so awesome and helpful, and Lauren Williams, thank you for bringing a legal perspective. My question is to all of you. I saw what was happening 3 years ago. It's all I've been with this. And we tried to get the legislative bodies involved in Pennsylvania. It was impossible. New York, my mom's from Oswego. I'm a 5th generation New Yorker, so I thought I better come up and see what we can do about stopping it here. But I'll tell you, I decided this wasn't a political issue. It's not one at all. That's why I brought Arun Gandhi down from Rochester to get involved. That was the Peace Weavers and myself, because we thought we'd just make this into a good old-fashioned human rights, civil rights, and peace movement. And it's working. So I want you all to contact your senator that represents you and your representatives and tell them, have they come and seen it yet? Because that's what we're calling it. And Dr. Druska, I would ask you what you did yesterday with the other ladies that came, Susan and everybody else, and Jill. What did you see yesterday that you hadn't seen before by coming, and why should most of the people in this room that haven't done it come down and see it for themselves?
You know, we talk about the magnitude, or I speak about the magnitude of this, but seeing it really live, you all took us to a compressor station, you took us to a drilling site that was just starting, and then you took us to that huge multi-pad site with lots of staging areas. We passed 6 trucks, beautiful shiny blue and red trucks. Very nice and clean, and they said fresh water and residual waste on them. So we wanted to know where they were going. So we were standing with the senators at the staging area with the large green containers that were all connected and that had some waste in them. And these trucks that were obviously empty because their middle wheels were up, so they weren't laden with some fluid as yet. They were all backing up into these green containers. And they said fresh water, the next one said residual waste, and then residual waste, and then fresh water, and then residual waste again. And Vera has pictures of it, and the senators can testify to that as well. They were all getting the same stuff. So I don't know what it was that they were getting, but whether trucks were leaving that said fresh water and trucks that said residual waste, whatever it was the same thing.
Okay, we've got a question over here, John.
hand the mic, but I want to say Iris, Vera, and Hillary, you're my heroes here. Why are the women standing up, not the men? Come on, guys, stand up and take care of this.
Hi, I'm John Kesich from Tioga County, Pennsylvania, and I wanted to mention that this Thursday, May 2nd, there's going to be a hearing down in Harrisburg chaired by some Democratic representative, I don't remember who. Thank you. And I would really love for any or all of the presenters tonight to go down there and tell your stories to them, if you can. And
I will be testifying. I've been asked to testify.
Great.
I will get my 8 to 10 minutes, and I will be standing between the legislators and their lunch.
Questions, John? Do you have a question?
Not really, but I do have one other announcement. Anybody who has a Twitter or a Facebook account who can't come down Monday, there's a thunderclap in Harrisburg, and you can find out about that by going to Google groups and searching for Harrisburg thunderclap. And basically what that is a bunch of people on social media sign up for this thing, and then messages are sent out automatically, synchronized to the legislators. Thank you very much, and thank you all for coming.
Okay, good job. This one right up here. And please restrict your comments, and let's ask some questions. We've got these people here tonight. They don't often come to the area, so let's restrict it to questions and not statements, please.
Okay, I'm Frank. I'm from Yates County, Pennsylvania. First of all, I'd like to say that, this sounds like a movie that I watched one day with Steven Seagal on Deadly Ground, because that's what it is. But my question is for Lauren. I'm thinking about how this law thing works, and particularly I'm looking at it as saying that we're pretty much in a situation where New York, for all of us, that we need an attorney too to help us then, wouldn't we? And basically,
I don't know if I quite...
in other words, what I'm saying is if we're really going to fight hard and we want to fight to stop these people from doing whatever they want to do, shouldn't we have some kind of legal backup?
It's definitely helpful. I know the Columbia Law Clinic is actively involved in helping folks. I know that Deb Goldberg at Earth Justice is actively involved as well. But it helps to have interdisciplinary, to have your scientists, to have everybody together. Sharing the information, this is one reason why the gag rule is a problem in Pennsylvania, to share information, to develop different options, to come up with different strategies. For example, in Pennsylvania, we work with people to develop stronger zoning to protect their communities. Some people take the route of appealing permits. Other people choose different routes. So it's definitely helpful. It definitely gives you a different perspective. And I think that's about all I have on that.
All right, well, you answered the question. That's all I wanted to know. Thank you.
I'm going to entertain one more question. Betty.
Yeah, correct me if I'm wrong, but is
Your name is...
Okay, no.
Shall I introduce you? This is Betty Egg from Elmira.
Just give him a hard time, sorry. With the impact fees in Pennsylvania, right, is this because, was that because communities and counties were hurting because they weren't getting money from the gas industry, and that's why the counties have to go along with a uniform set of zoning in order to get the impact money? Is that...
Let me dispel the myth associated with the connection between ordinances and the impact fee. There is no connection between the chapter on local ordinances and the chapter on the impact fee. Not everybody in the state who has zoning is subject to these uniform as one-size-fits-all zoning components of Act 13. Not everybody gets the money from Act 13. So for people, for instance, so the impact fee only applies, I believe it only applies, it's been some time since I've looked at the provision, applies to unconventional wells, which has a very specific definition in the law. It doesn't apply to pipelines, it doesn't apply to compressor stations, and it doesn't apply to processing facilities. But all those facilities and unconventional wells, conventional wells, impoundment pits are covered under the zoning piece. So regardless of whether you're getting any money from the impact fee or not, you're subject to the zoning restrictions in Act 13.
And the other question is, I know Governor Corbett said a while back that he asked about forced pooling. He said he didn't believe that anybody should be forced to have their land as part of a drilling unit, like we have compulsory integration here. And he said he thought it was not good. He thought it was too much like eminent domain, and he said he would never approve it. What is the story? Do you have forced pooling now, or?
Not for the Marcellus Formation. We have an oil and gas conservation law that's been around for years and years in Pennsylvania, but it only applies to certain formations like below a certain level. I believe the Marcellus is above it, so there's no forced pooling for Marcellus wells.
But there are for other structures? Well,
so I believe it has to be a formation below the Onondaga, and the Marcellus is above that formation. So pretty much, unless you're drilling a really, really deep well, which at this point, to our knowledge, I honestly don't know the extent of the Utica. I think it's underneath the Marcellus, so there's a possibility we could get into that, but I haven't seen that yet.
Well, I'd like to thank you all for coming, and if you have additional questions, I'm going to try and get these people home. This is the third leg of the third forum in a row, and I know they're all sleepy and want to get to bed, but if you've got a quick question, I'm sure they might entertain that. So thank you very much.
I just